Hi again, welcome to Maths is Not a Mystery. We're looking at square numbers and cube numbers today, Foundation grades 1 to 4. Starting off with, what are square numbers? Well, a square number is the answer to a question, and the question would be, multiply a number by itself, 1 times 1. The answer to that is 1. 1 is a square number. 2 times 2, the answer to that is 4. 4 is a square number. 3 times 3, and of course the answer to that is 9. 9 is a square number. 4 times 4, 5 times 5, 1,000 times 1,000, 1,000,000 times 1,000,000. As long as the numbers on both sides of the times sign are the same, your answer is a square number. Why is it called a square number? It's called a square number because you can make a square out of it. You can make a square out of one single square. You can't make a square out of two squares, so 2 is not a square number. You can't make a square out of 3 squares, so 3 isn't a square number. But you can make a square out of 4 squares, so 4 is a square number. And the next time you can make a square out of a bunch of little squares is when you've got 9 of them, because you can't do it out of 5, and you can't do it out of 6 or 7 or 8, but you can make a square out of 9. And you can keep on going like that. So you can have a 1 by 1 square, a 2 by 2, a 3 by 3, a 4 by 4, and so on. Now you need to know all of the square numbers up to 15 times 15. You could be asked questions about any of those things in foundation stage. So let's take a look at what the answers are. We've already done 1 times 1 is 1, 2 2s are 4, 3 3s are 9. 4 4s for your next square number is 16. 5 5s are 25. 6 6s are 36. I'm just going to stop for a second and just take a look at this, the gap between them. To get from 1 to 4 you have to add 3. To get from 4 to 9 you have to add 5. To get from 9 to 16, you have to add 7. And to get from 16 to 25, you have to add 9. That's interesting. I'm not sure it'll help you with great big square numbers, but it's interesting that the gap gets 2 bigger every time. All right, carrying on with the numbers. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8 is 64. 9 times 9, 81. Most people know the square numbers up to 10 times 10, because that's 100 there. 11 times 11. Now I'm going to just write it differently because the answer is 121. I'm going to write it as 11 squared because that's what it means, isn't it? The little 2 means that we've got one of the numbers and another of the numbers with a multiplication sign in between them. And that little 2 tells us that there's a 11 times another 11. The answer is 121. Now this is handy. You've got 11 and that little 2 drops in the middle. 121. Could be a good way to remember it. If it helps, great. 12 12s, 12 squared, 144. 13 squared. Now that's 169. People sometimes don't remember that one, so try and commit that to memory, because if you can get that one right, you can remember 14 squared, because look, it's 196. It's 169 flipped over, same 3 numbers in a different order. Finally, 15 squared is 225. Now that's the square numbers all the way to 15 squared. You're supposed to know those. And the only way you can really know them is to commit them to memory. Just learn them and make sure that you've got it, because you could be asked those questions on the foundation paper. Now, as well as knowing squares, there is another thing called square roots. And they are closely connected, and they are basically just the same thing backwards. Square roots, you have a sign that looks like that, a bit like a tick with a lid on it. And if we were being asked the question of square root of 16, it would be written like that. Okay? The square root of 16 is 4. Can you see why? 4 fours are 16. The square root of 16, we're asking you what number has to be multiplied by itself to make 16. So the square root of 16 is 4. The square root of 81 is 9. So the square roots are where the square numbers came from in the first place. Okay, just like with a plant, the roots are the things that are underneath at the bottom of it. It's the same with a square root. It's the thing that it started from. Now, just to confuse it ever so slightly, every number can have 2 square roots. Because if you think about this, you know, I hope, that a plus times a plus gives you a plus number, and a minus times a minus gives you a plus. So actually, the square root of 16 could be 4, or it could also be minus 4. Because minus 4 times minus 4, 2 minuses make a plus, minus 4 times minus 4 also makes 16. The square root of 81 could also be minus 9, because minus 9 times minus 9 makes a positive number, makes 81. So square roots can be plus or minus. Every number has a positive square root and a negative square root. The nice thing is, of course, they are exactly the same digit. So if it's plus 9, the opposite one is going to be minus 9. If it's plus 4, it's going to be minus 4. If it's plus 19, it's going to be minus 19. So there's never anything more complicated than that. But it's just worth knowing that there is a plus and a minus each time. Okay, so that's squares then. Squares multiply the same number by itself, you get a square number. The square root is the opposite. You then find out what had to be multiplied by itself to get that square number. It's worth remembering that you might be able to estimate a square root. Let me show you what I mean. If we said something like, what's the square root of, let's say 67. Now, I don't know the square root of 67, and I wouldn't expect you to know the square root of 67, but I do know 2 important things. I know that the square root of 64 is 8. 8 eighths are 64. And I know that the square root of 81 is 9. Now, I know also that 67 comes between 64 and 81. So I know that the square root of 67 is going to be 8 point something. And I know it's probably going to be a lowish number because 67 is closer to 64 than it is to 81. And it's going to be 8 point something. So if I whack it into a calculator and I get an answer that says 24.3, I know that that is wrong. Use your common sense while you're doing any square roots. Have a guess. Estimate roughly where the number is going to be using the square numbers that you know. And it's going to be between 2 square numbers that you know. And so the answer that comes out on your calculator should be sensible. This will be 8 point something. If it comes out as anything other than 8 point something, then we've made a mistake typing it into the calculator. All right, let's move on. Let's go to cube numbers now. All right, cube numbers are when you do this. Okay, you multiply them together 3 times. 1 times 1 times 1. It doesn't mean 1 plus 1 plus 1. Lots of students get that wrong. The answer isn't 3. 1 times 1 is 1. And now times that by 1. It's still 1. Okay, we write it as 1 cubed. The little 3 there is telling us that there are 3 of them multiplied together. 2 cubed is not 6. 2 times 2 is 4. Now times that by 2, and the answer is 8. Okay, so 2 cubed is 8. Now these numbers get very big very quickly. 3 times 3 is 9. Times that by 3 makes 27. So 3 cubed is 27. You see it's going up pretty fast now. You have to know the cubes of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 10. So let's do them. 4 cubed is 4 times 4, which is 16. Times that by 4, it's 64. And that's 4 cubed. 5 cubed is 5 times 5, which is 25. Times that by 5 is 125. 5 cubed. Going up pretty fast here, isn't it now? We don't need to know the ones between 5 and 10 off by heart. We can use a calculator to work them out, and we need to understand what we're doing. So if they ask you 8 cubed, you would do 8 times 8 times 8. But you don't need to know it in your brain. You do need to know 10 cubed. 10 tens are 100. 10 of those are 1,000. So 10 cubed is 1,000. Okay, they're the ones you need to know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. And you would also need to understand the idea of a cubed root. Same sign as a square root, but it has a little 3 in it there to tell you that we don't want the square root, we want the cubed root. The cubed root of the cubed root of 125 is 5. Exactly the same as we do square numbers with. This time it's only a positive, because if it was negative, 5 times minus 5 times minus 5 would be 25. Times that by minus 5, it would be a minus 125. So that rule that worked with the square numbers, saying it can be negative and positive, is not true with cube numbers. And we don't need to have that. We don't need to worry about it. They're not going to ask you questions that involve that. So there we go. That's what cubes are. Squares then multiply the same number together twice. Cubes multiply the same number together 3 times over. And square roots and cubed roots are where you began with to get the square number or to get the cube number. Okay. On your calculator you may occasionally see a key that says that. If you want to know what 4 squared is, you type in 4 and then you type that little button there and it'll come up with 16. For the cubes, it'll say that on your key. If you want to know what 4 cubed is, type in 4 and that little button and it'll come up with your answer of 64. If you wanted to do a different power, you have this key on many calculators, and if you wanted to do something like 6 to the power 5, you would type in 6 and then you would type in this little thing here and then 5 and equals, and it would tell you what 6 to the power 5 was. But we'll cover that in other videos. That's not quite so important right now. We've covered squares and cubes at foundation level, grades 1 to 4. I hope it's made sense. I hope you've enjoyed it. See you again on another version of Maths is Not a Mystery. Bye bye.